The moment Clara Whitmore stepped into the Ashford estate that October evening, she knew exactly what they expected: her humiliation, her silence, her disappearance. 6 months after the divorce that had ripped through London's elite like wildfire, 6 months of gossip columns and cruel speculation, she was supposed to be broken. But as the ballroom doors swung open and 300 pairs of eyes turned toward her, Clara did something unthinkable. She smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile of a society wife. A real one. Dangerous. Free. And across that crowded room, standing beside the woman who'd replaced her, Richard Whitmore's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Before we begin Clara's extraordinary journey from shame to power, I invite you to stay until the very end of this story. Like and comment with your city name below. I want to see how far Clara's defiance travels across the world. The October wind had teeth that night. Clara felt it bite through her evening coat as her carriage rolled up the gravel drive of Ashford Estate, past the manicured hedges and marble fountains that announced wealth in every carefully placed stone. She'd been to the Ashfords' autumn gala 7 times before, always on Richard's arm, always wearing the exact shade of blue he preferred, always laughing at Lord Pemberton's terrible jokes because it was expected, always invisible. "Miss Whitmore," her driver Thomas said quietly. Not Mrs. anymore. That title had been surgically removed 6 months ago in a courtroom that smelled of old leather and older money. "Are you certain about this?" Clara looked at the golden light spilling from the estate's windows. Inside, everyone who mattered in London society was already drinking, dancing, destroying reputations with carefully chosen words, and they would all be waiting for her to either not show up at all, the coward's choice, or to slink in wearing mourning black and appropriate shame. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said, and stepped out before Thomas could open the door for her. She'd chosen red, not the demure burgundy that might have been acceptable for a woman in her position. Deep crimson silk that caught the lamplight like liquid fire, with a neckline that Richard would have called unnecessarily attention-seeking, in that specific tone that made her feel 3 inches tall. The dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, had raised an eyebrow when Clara selected it. "People will talk," Mrs. Chen had warned. "They already are," Clara had replied. "At least now they'll have something worth discussing." The entrance hall was exactly as she remembered. Vaulted ceilings, imported Italian marble, a staircase wide enough for an army. But everything felt different when you weren't trying to make yourself smaller. The footman who took her coat did a visible double-take at her dress. Good. She could hear the party before she saw it. The string quartet playing something romantic and meaningless, the percussion of expensive shoes on expensive floors, the particular frequency of laughter that only happened when people were performing for each other. "Miss Clara Whitmore!" the announcer called out, his voice carrying across the ballroom. The music didn't stop. That only happened in novels. But conversations definitely stuttered. Heads turned with the subtle precision of vultures spotting something dying. Clara had spent 6 months imagining this moment, dreading it, almost canceling 3 times in the carriage ride alone. But here she was. Lady Ashford materialized first because society's matriarchs always did. She was 63, built like a battleship, and had the kind of smile that could mean absolutely anything. "Clara, darling, how unexpected." The pause before unexpected was deliberate enough to land a ship in. "We weren't sure you'd received the invitation." Translation: "We absolutely did not expect you to have the audacity to actually show up." "I never miss your autumn gala, Patricia," Clara said smoothly. "You know how I adore watching people pretend they're having a good time." Lady Ashford's smile tightened. "How droll. You look different," Clara suggested. "I've had some time to reconsider my wardrobe. Turns out blue isn't actually my color. Who knew?" "Indeed." Lady Ashford's eyes did a quick calculation, deciding probably whether Clara was having a breakdown or becoming a problem. "Well, do help yourself to the champagne. The Lord knows you must need it." She swept away, leaving Clara standing alone in the kind of social vacuum that usually preceded total ostracism. This was the moment, the test. In the next 60 seconds, someone would either approach her with genuine friendliness, proving she still had allies, or the isolation would crystallize and she'd spend the evening as a cautionary tale in red silk. Is that Clara Whitmore, or am I having a very specific hallucination? Clara turned. Eleanor Hartwick stood there with 2 champagne glasses and an expression of pure delight. Eleanor, who'd been her closest friend before the divorce, before Richard had made it quietly clear that continued friendship with his ex-wife would be awkward for everyone involved. Eleanor? Clara's voice almost cracked. Almost. Don't you dare cry. You'll ruin that absolutely magnificent entrance. Eleanor pressed a glass into Clara's hand. I've been standing here for 20 minutes hoping you'd actually show up. Margaret owes me £5. You bet on me? Darling, I've been betting on you for months. You just didn't know it. Eleanor's smile was real, warm, the first genuine thing Clara had felt since walking in. That dress is either brilliance or suicide. I haven't decided which. Can it be both? With you? Probably. Eleanor lowered her voice. He's here, with her, near the terrace doors, just so you're prepared. Clara had known Richard would be here. The Ashfords were his late father's closest friends. Not attending would have been unthinkable. And of course he'd bring Charlotte, the woman he'd been not having an affair with for the last year of their marriage, right up until the moment their divorce was final and suddenly they were engaged. I'm aware, Clara said quietly. And you came anyway. Especially because of that. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. You've changed. I've stopped apologizing for existing. It's surprisingly liberating. They moved deeper into the party together, and Clara could feel the weight of attention following them, like a physical thing. Whispered conversations that stopped just a fraction too late. Eyes that looked away just a second too slowly. This was what being scandalous felt like. Not the quiet shame Richard had promised her, but something sharper, more visible, more alive. Clara Whitmore, back from the dead. Lord Pemberton, 70 if he was a day, Scotch in hand and prejudice in his smile. He'd been Richard's mentor in business, the kind of man who thought women existed to look decorative and produce heirs. Not dead, Lord Pemberton, just resting. Heard you'd taken up some sort of scholarly pursuit? He said scholarly the way other people said unfortunate rash. I'm researching medieval property law and women's legal status. Fascinating how little has changed in some respects. His mustache twitched. Can't imagine why you'd want to bury yourself in dusty old books. Pretty woman like you should be thinking about finding another husband. Try again, as it were. Eleanor's grip on her champagne glass went white-knuckled, but Clara just smiled. Lord Pemberton, I'd rather be buried in dusty old books than buried alive in another marriage where my only value is existing quietly in the background. But thank you for your concern about my marital status. I'll file it right next to your opinions on everything else, in the waste bin. She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs from the inside. Eleanor followed, making a sound that was half laugh, half choke. Did you just... I did. Clara Whitmore, have you lost your entire mind? Probably. Clara grabbed a second glass of champagne from a passing server. Turns out, I quite like it this way. They found a spot near one of the tall windows overlooking the garden, where the autumn night pressed against the glass like something trying to get in. From here, Clara could see most of the ballroom. The dancers performing their careful choreography, the clusters of conversation, the social chess game that never stopped. And there, exactly where Eleanor had warned, stood Richard. He looked the same, infuriatingly the same. Tall, handsome in that conventional way that photographs well, perfectly dressed because he'd never worn anything that wasn't. His dark hair had maybe a touch more gray at the temples, but on him it just looked distinguished. Life had not punished Richard Whitmore for destroying his marriage. Life rarely punished men like Richard for anything. Charlotte stood beside him in pale pink, laughing at something he'd said. She was younger than Clara by 5 years, prettier in that uncomplicated way that men seem to prefer, and apparently content to be exactly what Richard wanted, the perfect replacement. You don't have to look, Eleanor said quietly. Yes, I do. Clara didn't take her eyes off them. I spent 6 months avoiding this, hiding, pretending if I didn't see it, it wasn't real. But it is real. He moved on before I even signed the papers, and I'm done letting that destroy me. It would destroy anyone. Then I'll be destroyed on my own terms. As if feeling her gaze, Richard looked up. Their eyes met across the ballroom, across 6 months of lawyers and settlement negotiations and carefully worded announcements in the society papers. For just a second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that she'd dared to show up. Then Charlotte said something, touching his arm, and he looked away. Dismissed, again. I need air, Clara said abruptly. Eleanor started to follow, but Clara shook her head. I'm fine, really. I just need a moment alone. The terrace was blessedly empty, the October cold sharp enough to cut through champagne fog and the suffocating weight of being watched. Clara gripped the stone railing and breathed. Just breathed. This was harder than she'd thought. She'd prepared herself for the whispers, the judgment, even for seeing Richard with his replacement. But she hadn't prepared for how much it would still hurt. Running away already? That was faster than I expected. Clara spun around. A man stood in the shadows near the door, so still she hadn't noticed him. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that would be handsome if it ever smiled, sharp angles and colder eyes. He wore formal evening clothes with the ease of someone who'd been born to them, and there was something in his posture that suggested he wasn't here because he wanted to be. I'm not running away, Clara said, irritated. I'm strategically relocating. Looks identical from where I'm standing. Then perhaps you should stand somewhere else. That earned her the ghost of a smile. Adrian Blackthorne, since we're apparently sharing this terrace. The name registered. The Duke of Thornfield, reclusive even by aristocratic standards. His wife had died 3 years ago, and he'd barely been seen in society since. The gossip about him ranged from tragic widower to possibly unhinged hermit. He owned half of Yorkshire and made a point of not caring what anyone thought about it. Clara Whitmore, she replied, since we're doing introductions. I know who you are. Everyone in that ballroom knows who you are. The question is whether you're brave or foolish for showing up tonight. Does it have to be one or the other? In my experience, bravery and foolishness are often the same thing, just viewed from different angles. He moved closer into the lamplight spilling from the ballroom. His eyes were gray, the color of winter storms. You're the one who told Lord Pemberton to file his opinions in the waste bin. You heard that? The whole room heard it. Pemberton still deciding whether to be offended or impressed. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I shouldn't have said it. Why not? It was true. Because that's not how this works. You smile, you nod, you let men like him say whatever they want because making a scene is worse than anything they can do to you. Is it? Adrian asked. Seems to me you've already survived the worst they can do. Divorce, scandal, public humiliation. You're still here, still standing. What exactly are you afraid of now? The question hit harder than it should have. Clara turned back to the railing, gripping it so hard her knuckles went white. I'm afraid that I'll do everything right, show up, hold my head high, prove I'm not broken, and it still won't matter. That I'll always be Richard's discarded wife, the woman who wasn't enough. Weren't enough? Adrian moved to stand beside her, looking out at the dark garden. Or refused to be small enough to fit in the box he wanted. Clara looked at him sharply. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know about boxes. His voice was quiet, distant. My wife was a painter, really talented, but her parents wanted her to be a duchess, and my parents wanted an heir, and somewhere in all that wanting, nobody asked what she wanted. She got smaller and smaller trying to fit, until there was nothing left. The grief in his voice was old, but not dead. Clara recognized it because she'd been living with a different version of the same thing for months. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. Just don't waste your time trying to fit in boxes anymore. He turned to leave, then paused. That dress, by the way, it's perfect. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it's honest. You wore red to a funeral and made everyone else realize they're the corpses. He disappeared back into the ballroom before Clara could respond. She stood there for several minutes, letting the cold air sting her face, replaying the conversation. Nobody had talked to her like that in, she couldn't remember. Like she was interesting, like her thoughts mattered. Richard had always made her feel like her ideas were cute accessories, nice to have, but ultimately decorative. When Clara finally went back inside, the party had reached that stage where the drinking made people either more honest or more reckless. Lord Pemberton was holding court near the fireplace, probably complaining about her. Lady Ashford was watching the dance floor with the expression of someone mentally cataloging social missteps for future use. And Richard was looking directly at her, not the dismissive glance from earlier. Really looking. Charlotte was occupied talking to someone else, and for just a moment, It was like the past 6 months hadn't happened. Like they were back in the early days before everything went cold and wrong. Then he started walking toward her. Eleanor appeared at Clara's elbow. "Do you want me to intercept?" "No." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm fine." Richard stopped a careful distance away, close enough to speak privately, far enough to avoid the appearance of intimacy. His cologne was the same. That bothered her more than it should. "Clara, I wasn't sure you'd come tonight." "Why wouldn't I? I was invited." "Yes, but—" He gestured vaguely, uncomfortably. "Given the circumstances, I thought you might prefer to avoid—" "Avoid what, Richard? Avoid watching you play happy couple with the woman you cheated on me with? Avoid society pretending my entire existence can be erased because it's convenient?" His jaw tightened. They were drawing attention now, conversations around them dropping to interested whispers. "I never cheated on you. Charlotte and I didn't begin our relationship until after you moved out. I moved out because you told me our marriage was over. 2 days later, you were seen dining with her. But sure, technically, you waited." What a gentleman. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. "You spent 8 years making me feel like everything I cared about was trivial. You hated when I read too much, talked too much, had opinions that didn't match yours. You wanted a wife who smiled at parties and stayed quiet otherwise. And when I couldn't be that person anymore, when I started suffocating, you found someone who could. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest, maybe for the first time." Richard glanced around at their growing audience. "This isn't the place." "There is no place, Richard. You made that clear when you filed for divorce and made sure everyone knew it was because I was difficult. Because I wanted to take university courses. Because I asked questions about your business instead of just nodding. Because I existed too loudly." "Clara." "No." She cut him off, and the word came out stronger than she'd ever managed during their marriage. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to approach me at parties and pretend we can have civil conversations like we're old friends. We're not friends. We're not anything. You made your choice. I'm making mine." She walked away before he could respond, before the shaking in her hands became visible, before the tears threatening at the back of her throat could betray her. Eleanor followed without a word, steering her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "That was—" Eleanor started. "Stupid? I was going to say magnificent." Clara let out a shaky breath. "I think I need to leave." "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "You came here to prove you're not broken. Leaving now, after confronting him, looks like retreat. Stay for 1 more hour. Dance. Smile. Show them you're fine." "I'm not fine." "Doesn't matter. What matters is that they think you are." So Clara stayed. She danced with Lord Hartwick, Eleanor's elderly father, who was kind enough not to mention her wobbling steps. She made polite conversation with people who 3 months ago had crossed the street to avoid her. She smiled until her face ached. And across the room, Adrian Blackthorne watched her with those storm-gray eyes, never approaching again but somehow always visible in her peripheral vision. A strange anchor in a night full of turbulence. By the time midnight approached, Clara's feet hurt, her face hurt from smiling, and she'd had enough champagne to make the whole evening feel slightly unreal. She was saying goodbye to Eleanor when Richard appeared one final time. But he wasn't alone. Charlotte was with him, pink dress and perfect smile and delicate hand on his arm. Up close, she was even prettier, doll-like features, clear skin, the kind of beauty that made other women feel immediately inadequate. "Clara," Richard said stiffly, "Charlotte wanted to meet you." This was a power play. Clara recognized it immediately. The new wife meeting the old one, establishing dominance, making it clear who won. "How lovely," Clara said flatly. Charlotte's smile never wavered. "I've heard so much about you. Richard speaks of you often." "Does he?" Clara looked at Richard. "That's fascinating, considering he barely spoke to me when we were actually married." "I just wanted to say," Charlotte continued, either brave or oblivious, "that I hope there's no hard feelings between us. These things happen. People grow apart." "People grow apart," Clara repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Charlotte," Richard said quietly, a warning. But Charlotte apparently had a script prepared. "Richard told me how unhappy you both were, how incompatible. It must be such a relief for you, really, to be free to pursue your own interests without the burden of marriage." The room wasn't spinning, but it felt like it should be. This girl, this perfect, pretty replacement, was standing here with Clara's ex-husband, wearing what looked like Clara's grandmother's necklace that Richard had inherited, talking about relief and burden like she had any idea what Clara had lost. "You're right," Clara said quietly, dangerously. "It is a relief. Every morning I wake up and don't have to wonder if I'm being too loud, too opinionated, too much of a person for my husband to tolerate. I don't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. I don't have to watch the man who promised to love me treat me like a disappointing investment." She looked directly at Richard. "So yes, Charlotte, I'm relieved." She looked directly. "I'm relieved I don't have to waste any more years on a man who saw me as a project to fix rather than a person to love." She walked away for the final time that night, leaving them standing there, leaving the whispers and stares and judgment. Thomas had the carriage ready, and Clara climbed in without looking back at the golden windows of Ashford Estate. Only when they were rolling down the dark road, London's lights in the distance, did she let herself cry. Not from sadness, not exactly. From release. From the sheer exhausting relief of having finally said the things she'd kept buried for years. From having worn red to their funeral, just like Adrian said, and survived. The city lights blurred through her tears as Thomas drove her home. Not to the house she'd shared with Richard, that cage of expensive furniture and careful silence, but to the small townhouse she'd rented in a less fashionable part of London. 3 rooms, a temperamental stove, and bookshelves she'd built herself. It wasn't much. It was hers. Clara paid Thomas, thanked him for waiting, and climbed the narrow stairs to her door. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Books stacked on every surface, research notes scattered across her desk, a half-finished pot of tea probably growing something biological by now. She kicked off her shoes, expensive, borrowed from Eleanor, already giving her blisters, and went to her desk. There, buried under references on medieval marriage law, was her acceptance letter from the British Library. They'd approved her research proposal. They'd taken her seriously. Clara Whitmore, scholar. Not Clara Whitmore, failed wife. She changed out of the red dress carefully, hanging it in her wardrobe like armor being stored after battle. Tomorrow she'd probably regret half of what she'd said tonight. Tomorrow Lord Pemberton would be telling everyone she'd lost her mind. Tomorrow the society pages would have new material for destroying her reputation. But tonight she'd been brave. Tonight she'd been honest. Tonight she'd chosen defiance. Clara fell asleep still thinking about Adrian Blackthorne's words. "You wore red to a funeral and made everyone else realize they're the corpses." And for the first time in months, she slept without nightmares of Richard's disappointment following her into dreams. She slept like someone who'd survived something, like someone who was just beginning to realize she might be more than just a survivor. The morning after the Ashford Gala arrived with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, Clara woke to find 3 letters shoved under her door, 2 of them unsigned warnings about inappropriate behavior, and one from her landlady, Mrs. Patterson, requesting she consider the reputation of the building's other tenants. She burned all 3 in the fireplace while drinking bitter coffee. By noon, Eleanor had arrived with newspapers tucked under her arm and an expression that promised nothing good. "Don't read them," Eleanor said, dropping into Clara's only decent chair. "That bad?" "You told Lord Pemberton to file his opinions in the waste bin. You publicly confronted your ex-husband. You wore red." Eleanor ticked off each transgression on her fingers. "The Times called you unmoored from social propriety. The Morning Post was less kind." Clara took the papers anyway. The society columnist, a woman named Beatrice Thornhill, who'd never written anything that didn't drip with poison, had dedicated half a page to dissecting Clara's appearance at the gala. The words desperate, unhinged, and cautionary tale appeared with alarming frequency. "Well," Clara said, folding the paper carefully, "at least they spelled my name right." "Clara, what did you expect, Eleanor? That I'd show up, and they'd suddenly decide I was brave instead of scandalous? That wearing a nice dress and holding my head high would somehow erase 6 months of them painting me as the failed wife? No, but I'm done caring what they think." Clara stood, pacing the small room. "I spent 8 years caring. It didn't save my marriage. It didn't make me happy. It just made me smaller." Eleanor watched her with worried eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Go to the library, continue my research, live my life." "The library won't protect you from this. People talk, Clara. They talk. And eventually it affects everything. Your work, your reputation, your ability to move through the world without doors closing in your face. Then let them close. Clara's voice was harder than she meant it to be. I'd rather have a small life that's mine than a big one that belongs to everyone else. Eleanor left eventually, still worried, still trying to convince Clara to lie low for a while. But lying low was how you disappeared. Clara had spent 6 months invisible, and she was done with it. The British Library became her refuge. The reading room was a cathedral of knowledge, vaulted ceilings, endless shelves, the kind of quiet that felt sacred. Here, nobody cared about her divorce or her dress or her failure to properly perform grief. Here, she was just another researcher hunched over medieval manuscripts, trying to understand how women had been legally erased for centuries. She'd been working for 3 hours when someone cleared their throat behind her. Adrian Blackthorne stood there with a stack of books under his arm, looking exactly as uncomfortable in the library as he had at the gala. "Stalking me, Your Grace?" Clara didn't look up from her notes. "Following up on an intriguing conversation." He set his books down at the table across from her without asking permission. "You disappeared rather quickly the other night." "I'd accomplished what I came for." "Which was?" "Proving I could survive it." Adrian opened one of his books, something on agricultural reform in the 18th century, but didn't seem to actually read it. The papers were unkind. The papers are always unkind to women who refuse to apologize for existing. Clara finally looked up. "Why are you here?" "Really?" "Research. You're a duke. You have people who do research for you." "Perhaps I prefer doing my own thinking." There was something in the way he said it that made Clara pause. She studied him more carefully, the expensive clothes worn with indifference, the dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleep was a stranger, the way he held himself like someone braced for impact. "You don't like them either," she said quietly. "The parties, the performances, the endless game of who matters and who doesn't. I tolerate them when necessary." He turned a page without reading it. "My wife loved them. She'd light up the moment we arrived, like something inside her finally got permission to shine. After she died, I kept going out of habit. Took me 2 years to realize I was attending a funeral every time." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Recognition. "Is that why you hide in Yorkshire?" "I don't hide. I exist on my own terms. There's a difference." "And yet here you are in London, at libraries and galas." "Here I am," he agreed, making a questionable series of choices. They worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than Clara usually experienced. Not heavy with judgment or expectation. Just two people existing in the same space, focused on their own thoughts. It was startling how rare that had become. An hour passed. Then another. The light through the tall windows shifted from morning gold to afternoon gray. Clara's hand cramped from writing notes, and her eyes ached from deciphering 13th century Latin, but she felt more settled than she had in days. "There's a lecture," Adrian said abruptly. "Tomorrow night. Professor Weatherby from Cambridge speaking on legal frameworks in medieval England. I thought you might find it relevant to your research." Clara looked up sharply. "How did you know what I'm researching?" "I asked the librarian what you were working on. She was very enthusiastic about your thesis on women's property rights." He didn't seem remotely ashamed of his nosiness. "The lecture is at the Royal Society. Very dry, very academic, absolutely terrible wine afterward. Interested?" This was dangerous territory. Adrian Blackthorne was a duke, recently widowed, exactly the kind of man whose attention would be misinterpreted by everyone who mattered. If she was seen with him, the gossip would shift from unstable divorcee to something worse. "Why are you asking me?" Clara said. "Because you're the only person I've met in the last 3 years who seems to actually think about things instead of just performing opinions." He closed his book with a decisive thud. "And because I suspect you're doing exactly what I did, hiding in research to avoid dealing with the fact that your entire life exploded and you're not sure who you are without it." The honesty was like cold water in the face. Clara opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Because he was right. The research wasn't just academic curiosity, it was armor. A way to have purpose when everything else had been stripped away. "I'll go," she heard herself say, "but I'm attending as a scholar, not as anyone's companion." Wouldn't dream of implying otherwise. "And if people talk," "People are already talking. At least this way they'll have something more interesting to say than speculation about your mental state. He left before she could change her mind, taking his agricultural reform books and his unsettling perceptiveness with him. That evening, Clara sat at her desk trying to work and failing spectacularly. Her mind kept circling back to Adrian's invitation, picking it apart for hidden meanings. He'd lost his wife to sadness and society's crushing weight. Clara had lost herself the same way. Maybe that's all this was. Two people who recognized the same damage in each other. Or maybe it was something more complicated than that. The knock on her door came just after dark. Clara wasn't expecting anyone, and London after nightfall wasn't kind to women living alone in unfashionable neighborhoods. She grabbed the fire poker before opening the door. Richard stood in the hallway. "What the hell are you doing here?" Clara didn't lower the poker. "We need to talk." He looked terrible, rumpled, unshaven, nothing like the polished man from the gala. "Can I come in?" "Absolutely not." "Clara, please. 5 minutes." "You don't get 5 minutes. You don't get anything." But she didn't close the door. Some stupid part of her still needed to hear what he had to say, still hoped for some explanation that would make the last 8 years make sense. Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from 1,000 arguments. "Charlotte is upset about what you said at the gala, about everything. And you came here at 9 o'clock at night to defend your fiancé's feelings to your ex-wife? That's your emergency? She thinks you hate her." Clara laughed, harsh and humorless. "I don't hate her. I don't think about her at all. She's just the woman who gets to inherit my failure." "You didn't fail. We both don't." Clara's voice went sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare stand in my doorway and pretend this was mutual. You wanted out. You found someone who fit your requirements better. You made that excruciatingly clear. I wanted you to be happy. You wanted me to be quiet. There's a difference." Richard's jaw clenched. "I tried, Clara. For years I tried to understand your need to question everything, to push back against every decision, to make everything complicated." "Complicated? I asked you questions about your business because I was interested in your life. I wanted to take classes because I was bored and lonely. I had opinions because I'm a human being with a functioning brain." Her voice was rising now, echoing in the narrow hallway. "None of that is complicated, Richard. It's just personhood, and you couldn't stand it. You're doing it again, making me the villain in your story." "You are the villain in my story. You spent 8 years making me feel like everything about me was wrong. Then you left me for someone who apparently gets everything right. You don't get to show up here demanding I make your new fiancé feel better about replacing me." "I'm not—" Richard stopped, took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. "I came here to offer you money." The words hung in the air like poison. "What?" "The settlement was generous, but I know you're living in this." He gestured at her small townhouse with barely concealed disdain. "I'll give you additional funds, enough to live comfortably. In exchange, you stop attending events where Charlotte and I will be present. You stop making scenes. You move on with your life quietly." Clara stared at him. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time since the divorce. He thought this was about money. He thought she was showing up at parties and confronting him because she couldn't let go, because she was bitter and vengeful and desperate. He had no idea who she actually was. He never had. "Get out," Claire said quietly. "Clara, get out." She raised the poker slightly. "Before I give you a reason to actually fear me." Richard left, and Clara slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. She stood there shaking, the poker still in her hand, fury and grief warring in her chest. He'd offered her money to disappear, like she was a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be hidden away. She grabbed her coat and left the townhouse before she could think better of it. The night was cold and damp, London's streets slick with rain that hadn't quite started falling yet. Clara walked without direction, just moving, burning off the rage that made her hands shake. She walked past the respectable houses with their warm lights and proper families, past the theaters letting out, crowds of people laughing and drunk, past the bridges where the Thames ran dark and ancient below. She ended up at the museum. It was closed, obviously, locked and dark and empty. But there was a bench outside, and Clara sat there in the almost rain, looking up at the classical columns and thinking about all the history locked inside. All the artifacts and evidence of lives lived centuries ago. Women who'd existed in systems designed to erase them, who'd survived anyway. You have a concerning habit of being alone in questionable locations at night. Clara didn't even turn around. Are you actually following me, or do you just have terrible timing? Adrian sat down beside her, collar turned up against the cold. I live 3 streets from here. Saw you walk past my window like you were being chased by demons. Just one demon, my ex-husband. Ah. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Did you hit him with the poker? How did you... You're still holding it. Clara looked down. She was, in fact, still gripping the fire poker like a weapon. She set it on the bench between them, suddenly exhausted. He offered me money to disappear, to stop attending events, stop making scenes, stop existing anywhere he might have to acknowledge me. What did you say? I told him to get out before I gave him a reason to actually fear me. She laughed, but it came out wrong. I'm not sure what I would have done if he'd stayed. Probably nothing. Probably exactly what you've been doing, surviving with more grace than he deserves. Adrian stretched his long legs out in front of him. For what it's worth, I don't think you're making scenes. I think you're making choices. There's a difference. Society doesn't see it that way. Society is run by people like your ex-husband and my late wife's parents. People so terrified of anything real that they've built an entire world of performance and pretense. Why would you want their approval? Clara turned to look at him. You're a duke. You're literally at the top of that world. I'm a title on a piece of paper and an estate I didn't ask for. The world you're talking about? I've never belonged to it. Neither did my wife, no matter how hard she tried. His voice went distant. She drowned in trying, and I just watched it happen. That's not your fault, isn't it? I knew she was unhappy. I knew the expectations were crushing her. I thought if I loved her enough, if I gave her space to paint, if I protected her from the worst of it. He stopped. Turns out love isn't enough when the whole system is designed to destroy you. They sat in silence, 2 broken people on a bench outside a closed museum, holding pieces of grief that didn't fit together but somehow matched anyway. Come to the lecture with me tomorrow, Adrian said finally. Not as anything, not as a statement or a scandal, just as 2 people who both need a reason to keep going. That's not a very romantic pitch. I'm not offering romance. I'm offering distraction and mediocre wine. Clara smiled despite everything. When you put it that way. She went home eventually, leaving the poker on the bench because carrying it through London streets seemed like an excellent way to end up arrested. Adrian walked her back, silent and steady, and left her at her door without trying to come in. The next morning brought a letter delivered by private courier. Clara recognized the seal. Blackthorn Estate. Inside, in sharp handwriting, the lecture begins at 7. I'll meet you at the Royal Society entrance at 6:30. Don't be late. I'm told I become intolerable when kept waiting. She spent the entire day debating what to wear. Not red this time. That had been armor for a specific battle. She settled on deep green, understated but not apologetic. Eleanor would call it a compromise. Clara called it strategy. The Royal Society building was all marble and brass, intellectual grandeur designed to intimidate. Adrian was already waiting, leaning against a column like he owned the place. For all Clara knew, his family probably did. You came, he said. You sound surprised. After last night, I thought you might decide people weren't worth the trouble. I haven't decided yet. I'm gathering evidence. Clara took his offered arm, properly formal, nothing anyone could criticize. Tell me you weren't lying about the terrible wine. It's so bad it might actually be vinegar. Perfect. I need something to match my mood. The lecture hall was half full of academics and aristocrats pretending to be interested in medieval legal frameworks. Professor Weatherby was exactly as dry as promised, a reed-thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose and a voice that could cure insomnia. But his research was solid, and Clara found herself actually taking notes. Adrian sat beside her, occasionally leaning over to whisper sarcastic observations that made her bite back laughter. He's been on this same paragraph for 10 minutes. He's being thorough. He's being criminal. I want those 10 minutes back. During the break, they escaped to the reception area where the promised terrible wine was being served. It was in fact possibly vinegar. I warned you, Adrian said, grimacing at his glass. You did. I chose not to believe you. They were standing near the windows, Clara trying to decide if she should suffer through another hour of Weatherby, when a familiar voice cut through the conversational murmur. Clara, what an unexpected surprise. She turned. Of course it was Richard, because apparently the universe had decided she couldn't have one evening of peace. He was alone this time, no Charlotte to weaponize, just him in his perfect evening clothes with his perfect hair and his perfect ability to ruin everything. Richard, funny seeing you here. Since when do you care about medieval law? Client event. His eyes flicked to Adrian, recognition and calculation happening simultaneously. Your Grace, I didn't realize you knew Clara. We're colleagues, Adrian said smoothly. Fellow researchers. I'm surprised you're familiar with legal history, Mr. Whitmore. I was under the impression your expertise lay in, what was it, import regulations? The subtle dig landed. Richard's expression tightened. I have varied interests. Clearly. The tension was thick enough to slice. Other people were starting to notice, conversations dropping to interested whispers. Clara could feel the gossip forming in real time, the story already being written. Divorced woman, widowed duke, scorned ex-husband. The scandal writes itself. We should go, Clara said quietly to Adrian. But Richard wasn't done. I meant what I said last night. The offer still stands. If you need, I don't need anything from you. Clara's voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the fury from the night before. Not money, not permission, not your opinion on how I should live my life. You made your choice. I'm making mine. We're done, Richard. Completely done. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was staying as long as I did. She walked out, Adrian beside her, leaving Richard standing there with his offer and his assumptions. They didn't stop until they were outside, the November cold sharp enough to hurt. That was brave, Adrian said. That was necessary. Clara was shaking, but not from cold. From the sheer release of finally, truly, cutting the last thread connecting her to Richard. He keeps trying to make me into someone who needs him, someone small and manageable. I'm done being that person. Good. They stood there on the steps of the Royal Society, London sprawling dark and infinite around them. Clara felt untethered, dangerous, like she might do something completely reckless. I should go home, she said, not moving. You should. This is going to start rumors, you know that. Let it. Clara looked at him, really looked. Why are you doing this? Inviting me to lectures, showing up when I'm spiraling, defending me to my ex-husband. What do you want from me? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't wanted anything in 3 years. Then you walked into that gala wearing red like a declaration of war, and I remembered what it felt like to be interested in something other than my own grief. He met her eyes. Maybe I'm using you as a distraction. Maybe you're using me the same way. Maybe that's enough for now. It should have felt cynical. Instead, it felt honest. Dinner, Clara heard herself say. Tomorrow. Somewhere nobody knows us. Somewhere we can talk without performing. That's the best idea I've heard in years. Adrian called her a cab, paid the driver, and sent her home before the rumors could solidify into scandal. But as Clara rode through the dark streets back to her tiny townhouse, she felt something shifting inside her. Not healing, that would take longer, but opening. Like a door she'd thought was permanently sealed had suddenly cracked ajar, letting in dangerous, intoxicating possibility. Richard wanted her to disappear. Society wanted her to apologize. Eleanor wanted her to be careful. Clara wanted to burn it all down and see what grew in the ashes. She spent the next morning trying to convince herself that dinner with Adrian Blackthorne was a terrible idea. By noon, she'd failed completely. Clara stood in front of her wardrobe, which was a generous term for the narrow closet that held everything she owned, and tried to remember the last time she'd chosen clothes for herself instead of for someone else's expectations. The red dress hung there like a reminder of her night at the Ashford Gala, but that had been armor. Tonight needed to be something different. She settled on navy blue, simple and unpretentious, then changed into gray, then back to navy, then threw both on the bed and sat down hard on her mattress, laughing at herself. You're acting like a girl going to her first dance, she said out loud to her empty room. This is dinner, conversation. Two people who don't particularly like society finding temporary refuge in each other's damage. That's all. The mirror disagreed. Her reflection looked nervous and hopeful and terrified in equal measure. Adrian had sent a note that morning with an address in Southwark, a part of London where aristocrats didn't usually venture unless they were slumming or looking for trouble. The food is better when nobody's trying to impress anyone, he'd written. 7 o'clock. Don't dress up. So of course she spent 2 hours trying to figure out what don't dress up actually meant. She arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes late, intentionally, because arriving exactly on time felt too eager, and found Adrian already seated at a corner table that was probably the least visible spot in the entire establishment. The place was small, cramped, smelled like garlic and wine and bread. Nothing like the restaurants Richard had favored with their starched tablecloths and menus in French. "You're late," Adrian said. "You told me not to dress up. That took planning. You look—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever he was about to say. "You look like yourself." Is that a compliment or an observation? Both. They ordered without looking at menus, Adrian apparently already familiar with the place. The owner, a round Italian man named Giuseppe, treated Adrian like a regular customer instead of a duke, which Clara found more surprising than she probably should have. "You come here often?" she asked once Giuseppe had disappeared back into the kitchen. "Once a week, usually. Sometimes more when London gets particularly insufferable." Adrian poured wine from a carafe that had simply appeared on their table. "It's the only place in the city where nobody cares who I am or asks me when I'm planning to remarry." "People ask you that?" "Constantly, as if grief has an expiration date and I'm past due." He took a drink. "What about you? What's the most offensive question people ask? Whether I'm planning to try again with marriage, like it's a test I failed and need to retake." Clara wrapped her hands around her wine glass. "Or they ask if I'm lonely, which is code for, are you desperate enough yet to settle for whoever will have you?" "Are you? Lonely?" The question was too direct, too honest for polite conversation. Clara considered lying, then didn't. "Yes, but I was lonelier in my marriage than I've been since it ended. At least now the isolation is honest." Adrian nodded slowly. "My wife used to say she felt loneliest in crowds. All those people, all that noise, and she couldn't reach any of them. Couldn't make them understand what she needed." His jaw tightened. "I should have listened better." "You can't save someone who's drowning if they won't grab the rope. Can't you? Or do you just tell yourself that so the guilt doesn't kill you?" The food arrived before Clara could answer. Pasta that smelled like heaven, bread still warm from the oven, vegetables that hadn't been arranged into decorative sculptures. Real food. Giuseppe winked at Adrian and said something in Italian that made Adrian almost smile. They ate in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that didn't need filling. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until she'd cleared half her plate. Real hunger, not the performative picking at food that had characterized dinners with Richard. "Tell me about your research," Adrian said eventually. "The medieval property law. What made you choose that?" "I wanted to understand how women disappeared." Clara set down her fork. "How the law could just erase them. A woman gets married and legally she stops existing. Her property becomes his. Her earnings become his. Her children become his. She's not a person anymore, just an extension of her husband. And if he decides she's inconvenient, he can divorce her, and she leaves with nothing. No rights, no recourse. Just gone." Sounds familiar. That's the point. I spent 8 years being legally erased while still breathing. I wanted to know how we got here, how this became normal. Adrian was quiet for a moment, studying her. "You're not just researching, you're building a case." "Maybe I am." Clara met his eyes. "Someone should." "You know it won't change anything. Your research, your arguments, the men who make the laws won't care." "Then I'll make them care." "How?" "By writing papers nobody reads, giving lectures to empty rooms." "Clara, I'm not trying to discourage you, but the system isn't designed to be changed from the inside. It's designed to protect itself." "So what would you suggest? That I just accept it? That I do my research quietly and don't make trouble?" The familiar anger was rising in her chest now. "That's what everyone wants. Eleanor wants me to be careful. Richard wants me to disappear. Even you. I want you to be strategic." Adrian's voice was sharp. "There's a difference between being brave and being reckless. You can't burn down the establishment if you get yourself exiled first." "I'm already exiled, The moment I filed for divorce, I became a social pariah. I have nothing left to lose. You have your work, your independence, your future. Those are worth protecting. Not if protecting them means staying silent. They stared at each other across the table, tension crackling in the space between. This was their first real argument, Clara realized. The first time the careful distance they'd been maintaining had collapsed into something raw. "I'm sorry," Adrian said finally. "I have no right to tell you how to fight your battles." "No, you don't." But Clara's anger was already fading. "Though I appreciate that you care enough to try. I'm not sure care is the right word. He stopped, frustrated. "I see you doing what my wife tried to do. Fighting a system that's rigged against you. And I know how that story ends. Your wife isn't me. No, you're angrier, more stubborn, probably more likely to actually burn something down." He almost smiled. "But you're also alone. And fighting alone is how they win." Clara wanted to argue, but the truth in his words stopped her. She was alone. Eleanor supported her, but carefully, always with one eye on propriety. Her family had stopped speaking to her the moment the divorce was final. "For your own good," her mother had written, as if excommunication was an act of love. The academic community was interested in her research but wary of her scandal. She'd chosen defiance, and defiance was expensive. "So what do I do?" The question came out smaller than she meant it to. "You let people help you. You build alliances. You stop treating every conversation like a battlefield." Adrian reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "You let yourself be something other than constantly at war." "I don't know how to do that anymore." "Then learn." They finished dinner in a different kind of silence, thoughtful instead of comfortable. Giuseppe brought dessert without being asked, some kind of cream and coffee concoction that was probably illegal in the better parts of London. Clara let the sweetness melt on her tongue and thought about what Adrian had said. Building alliances, accepting help, being strategic instead of just reactive. It all sounded so reasonable when he said it, but reason hadn't gotten her through the last 6 months. Anger had, defiance had, the absolute refusal to apologize for taking up space. "There's a publisher," Adrian said as they were leaving. "Friend of mine. Well, more like someone who owes me a favor. He's been looking for controversial works, things that challenge conventional thinking." Clara stopped walking. "You want to introduce me? I want to give you options. Your research deserves to be read, Clara, by more people than just academics who will read it politely and then ignore it. Publishing would be..." She couldn't even finish the sentence. Publishing her work would make it real, permanent, impossible to dismiss. It would also make her more of a target than she already was. Richard would be furious. Is that a reason not to do it? No, just an observation. Good. Adrian flagged down a cab. "I'll arrange a meeting next week, if you're interested." "I'm interested." He put her in the cab, paid the driver again, and watched until they pulled away from the curb. Clara turned around to see him still standing there under the street lamp, looking like someone who'd forgotten how to leave. The next 3 days passed in a blur of research and nervousness. Clara tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept circling back to the possibility of publication, of her words existing in the world, creating change or at least conversation. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Eleanor came by on the 4th day with news that wiped out everything else. "Have you seen the latest society pages?" She didn't wait for Clara to answer, just thrust the newspaper into her hands. The headline made Clara's stomach drop. "Divorced woman and widowed duke. New scandal brewing?" Beatrice Thornhill had outdone herself this time. The article managed to suggest, without ever quite stating it outright, that Clara was a social climber using Adrian's grief for her own advancement, that their dinner in Southwark had been observed by concerned citizens, that Clara's behavior since her divorce indicated a pattern of desperation and inappropriate attachment. Clara couldn't find words bad enough. "Slander," Eleanor finished. "Absolute vicious slander. But Clara, you can't ignore this. People are talking. They're saying you've set your sights on a duke, that you're using him to regain status after Richard discarded you." "I'm not using anyone?" "I know that. You know that. But society doesn't care about truth. They care about narrative. And right now the narrative is that you're a desperate woman making poor choices." Clara read the article again, anger building with every poisonous word. Who's the concerned citizen who observed us? Who's feeding Thornhill this information? Does it matter? The damage is done. But it did matter. Because someone was watching her, tracking her movements, reporting back to a gossip columnist who'd made a career out of destroying women. That wasn't accidental. That was deliberate. That was Richard. She was certain of it without being able to prove it. This was exactly his approach, not confronting her directly, but working behind the scenes to make her life impossible, cutting off her oxygen until she had no choice but to disappear the way he wanted. I need to see Adrian, Clara said abruptly. Clara, that's exactly the wrong... I need to warn him. He has no idea what he's walked into. She left before Eleanor could stop her, taking a cab to the Blackthorn London residence. It was in Mayfair, of course, because that's where Dukes lived, a 4-story townhouse that probably cost more than Clara would earn in several lifetimes. The butler who answered the door looked at her like she was something unfortunate the cat had dragged in. The Duke is not receiving visitors. Tell him it's Clara Whitmore, it's urgent. Miss Whitmore, tell him it's about the society pages. Tell him he needs to see this before it gets worse. The butler disappeared, and Clara stood in the entrance hall trying not to touch anything expensive. The house was elegant in that cold, museum-like way of old money. Perfect furniture nobody actually sat on, art chosen for investment value, everything calculated to impress. Adrian appeared at the top of the stairs, still in shirt sleeves like he'd been working. Clara, what's wrong? She held up the newspaper. We made the scandal sheets. Beatrice Thornhill has decided we're her new target. He came down, took the paper, read it with an expression that went from neutral to increasingly dark. When he finished, he folded it carefully and set it on a side table. Well, he said, I suppose we knew this was coming. That's it? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? That I'm shocked? That I didn't expect society to turn our dinner into a scandal? He looked tired suddenly. Clara, the moment you walked into that gala wearing red, you painted a target on yourself. Being seen with me just made it bigger. So you regret it? Inviting me to the lecture, dinner, all of it? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I'm saying that I've been where you are, fighting a system that's designed to destroy you, and I learned that you can't win by playing their game. You have to change the rules entirely. How? By not caring what they think, by building a life so far outside their world that their opinions become irrelevant. He gestured at the perfect lifeless house around them. This isn't my life. This is a museum I'm required to maintain. My actual life is in Yorkshire, on land that's been in my family for 300 years, doing work that matters to people who exist outside London's social circus. Then why are you here? Because you are. The words hung in the air between them. Too honest. Too much. Clara felt her breath catch. Adrian, I know this is complicated. I know we barely know each other. I know that anything between us will be dissected and weaponized by people like Thornhill. He stepped closer. But I'm tired of living half a life because I'm afraid of what people might say. Aren't you? Yes. The admission came out as barely a whisper. But I'm also afraid of making another mistake, of choosing wrong again. Then don't choose, not yet. Just keep having dinner with me. Keep arguing with me about strategy. Keep existing in the same space and see what happens. It was the least romantic proposition Clara had ever heard. It was also the most honest. Okay, she said. Okay? Yes, okay. I'll keep having dinner with you and arguing about strategy. But Adrian, if this gets worse, if they come after you the way they're coming after me, let them come. His voice was steel. I've survived worse than gossip columnists. Clara left feeling unsteady but determined. Let Beatrice Thornhill write her poison. Let Richard pull his strings from the shadows. Let society clutch its pearls and predict her downfall. She was done apologizing. The meeting with Adrian's publisher friend happened the following Tuesday at a coffee house in Bloomsbury. Henry Ashworth was younger than Clara expected, maybe 40, with ink-stained fingers and an expression of permanent skepticism. Adrian says you've written something inflammatory, were his first words. I've written a historical analysis of women's legal status in medieval England and how those frameworks still impact modern law. That's not inflammatory, that's academic. I've also drawn direct parallels to current divorce law, and property rights. I've argued that the legal erasure of women has been deliberate and systematic, and I've named specific cases where the law has been used to destroy women who dared to demand autonomy. Ashworth's eyebrows went up. Now that's inflammatory. Do you have proof? Court records, legal documents, testimony from women who've been through it. Clara pulled out her research folder, months of work condensed into evidence. Everything documented. He flipped through the pages, reading with increasing interest. This could cause problems, for you, I mean. The kind of men you're implicating here. They have power, money, lawyers who'll tie you up in libel suits for years. Let them try. You're not afraid? I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of staying silent. Ashworth looked at her for a long moment, then at Adrian, who'd been standing quietly by the window. You vouch for her? Completely. And you understand that publishing this will make her a target? That your association with her will be seen as... I understand. Adrian's voice was firm. Publish it. Ashworth grinned suddenly. I like you both. You're either very brave or very stupid. Either way, it'll sell books. He closed the folder. I'll need the full manuscript in 6 weeks. We'll release it in the spring. And Miss Whitmore? Yes? Prepare for war, because that's what this will be. Clara left the meeting feeling like she'd just signed a contract in her own blood. Publishing her research would make everything real, permanent, impossible to take back. It would also make her unemployable in academic circles, unmarriageable in social ones, and generally toxic to anyone who valued respectability over truth. Eleanor was waiting at Clara's townhouse when she got home, pacing the small front room like a caged animal. Where have you been? I've been here for an hour, meeting with a publisher. Clara set down her bag. I'm publishing my research, full book, spring release. Eleanor's face went white. Clara, no, you can't. Do you have any idea what that will do to your reputation? Destroy it completely, I imagine. This isn't funny. You're already scandalous enough. Publishing inflammatory research about women's rights and divorce law, you'll never recover from this. Good. Clara poured herself tea that had gone cold. I don't want to recover. I want to burn the whole thing down. You're not thinking clearly. You're angry at Richard, angry at society, and you're making decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. No, I'm making decisions that are finally mine. Clara sat down hard on her threadbare sofa. Eleanor, I love you. You've stood by me when nobody else would, but you're asking me to be careful, to protect a reputation that's already destroyed, to worry about recovering from a scandal I didn't create. I can't do that anymore. So what? You'll just throw away any chance at a normal life? Any possibility of happiness? I tried normal. I tried happiness on society's terms. It nearly killed me. Clara's voice cracked. I'd rather be scandalous and free than respectable and dead inside. Eleanor stared at her, eyes bright with tears. I can't watch you do this. Then don't watch. The words came out harsher than Clara meant them. Eleanor flinched, grabbed her coat, and left without another word. The door closing behind her sounded very final. Clara sat in her empty townhouse and let herself cry. Not from regret, she meant every word she'd said, but from the sheer exhaustion of losing people. Richard, her family, now possibly Eleanor. Everyone who was supposed to stand by her had conditions attached. Stay quiet. Be careful. Don't make trouble. She was so tired of conditions. The next 2 weeks were a blur of writing. Clara worked 18-hour days, turning her research into prose that was both academically rigorous and deliberately provocative. She named names, cited cases, built arguments that were impossible to dismiss or ignore. Adrian came by most evenings with dinner from Giuseppe's, sitting quietly in her cramped front room while she worked, occasionally reading passages and offering thoughts. He never told her to be careful, never suggested she soften her arguments. He just listened and helped her make them sharper. This section about coverture laws, he said one night, you should include the Blackwell case from 1823. Woman lost everything, property, children, even her clothes, because her husband claimed she was hysterical. How do you know about that case? My mother. Adrian's voice was quiet. She tried to leave my father when I was young. He had her declared mentally incompetent. She spent 3 years in an asylum until she agreed to come home and be quiet. Clara set down her pen. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just write about it. Make sure what happened to her can't keep happening. She included the case, and a dozen others like it. Women erased by law, by medicine, by husbands who had the power to rewrite reality itself. The manuscript was finished on a Tuesday night at 3 in the morning. Clara wrote the last sentence, set down her pen, and stared at the stack of pages that represented 6 months of work, 8 years of rage, and a lifetime of questions. She delivered it to Ashworth the next day. "It's good," he said after reading the first chapter. "It's also going to get you killed, metaphorically speaking. I'll take my chances. Spring publication. I'll send you proofs in February." He paused. "Miss Whitmore, I hope you understand what you're starting. This isn't just a book. This is a declaration of war against every man who's ever used the law to control women." "I know. Good. Because they're going to come after you with everything they have." Clara left his office and walked through London's winter streets, feeling lighter than she had in years. The book was done. The words existed. Whatever happened next, she'd told the truth. She was halfway home when she realized someone was following her. Not obviously, not threateningly, just there. A man in a dark coat, staying exactly one street behind, matching her pace. Clara's heart started hammering. She turned down a busier street, checking if he followed. He did. She stopped at a shop window, pretending to look at displays while watching his reflection in the glass. He stopped too, 30 feet back, face hidden by his hat. Clara made a decision. She turned abruptly and walked straight toward him. "Are you following me?" The man pulled an envelope from his coat. "I have a message from Mr. Richard Whitmore." His voice was rough, working class, not the usual polished tones of Richard's social circle. "I don't want any message from him." "He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that publishing your book would be a mistake you'd regret." The man held out the envelope. His words, not mine. Clara didn't take it. "Tell Richard if he wants to threaten me, he can do it himself instead of sending hired messengers." "Wasn't a threat, miss. Was a warning. He's prepared to stop publication, has lawyers ready. Evidence of your mental instability. Witnesses who'll testify you're unfit." The world tilted slightly. "What witnesses?" "Doctor who treated you for nerves during your marriage. Friends who'll say you've been acting erratically since the divorce. Your own mother's letter saying she's concerned about your welfare." The man's expression was almost sympathetic. "I'm just delivering the message, miss. But if I were you, I'd read what he's written." He set the envelope on a nearby bench and walked away. Clara stood there, trembling, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Her own mother. Richard had somehow gotten her mother to write a letter questioning her sanity. The doctor who'd prescribed her laudanum, when Richard claimed she was too anxious, of course he'd testify she was unstable. Richard wasn't just trying to silence her. He was trying to destroy her credibility completely. Make her unpublishable, unemployable, possibly even committable. And he had the evidence to do it. Clara picked up the envelope with shaking hands and read the letter inside. It was worse than she'd imagined. A detailed legal strategy for having her declared mentally incompetent. Her research dismissed as the ravings of an unstable woman. Her publisher threatened with lawsuits that would bankrupt him. Richard had thought of everything. Clara walked home in a daze, the letter burning like poison in her pocket. She made it to her front door before the panic hit. This was over. Her book, her research, her chance to matter. Richard was going to take it all away. And he was going to use the law to do it. The same law she'd been trying to expose. She burst through her door and found Adrian sitting in her front room, reading. "How did you get in here?" "Your landlady let me in. She seemed to think you needed looking after." He took in her expression. "What happened?" Clara handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly, his face going progressively darker. When he finished, he folded it carefully and met her eyes. "He can't actually do this," Adrian said. "Most of these threats are legal bluster." "He can, and he will." "You don't know Richard. He doesn't bluff." Clara's voice was shaking. "He has my mother's letter, Adrian. My own mother saying I'm mentally unstable. He has a doctor willing to testify. He'll drag me through courts, have me examined by his chosen physicians, make my entire life a public spectacle until either I withdraw the book or I'm committed to an asylum, and the law will let him do it. The same law I was trying to expose. So we fight back, get our own lawyers. With what money? What credibility? I'm already a scandalous divorcee. Add possibly insane to that, and nobody will take me seriously. Adrian stood up, crossing to where she stood frozen in her doorway. Then we make them take you seriously. How? We get married. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Clara stared at him. What? We get married. Immediately. Before Richard can file anything. Adrian's voice was urgent, intense. As a duchess, you have legal protection. Your research has legitimacy. Richard can't have you declared incompetent without my permission, and I'll never give it. Your mother's letter becomes irrelevant. The doctor's testimony becomes circumstantial. Everything changes. That's insane. That's strategic. He gripped her shoulders. Clara, you said you wanted to burn the system down. This is how. You use their own rules against them. You become untouchable. I can't marry you. We barely know each other. This is the only way to protect your work. You know it is. His eyes were desperate. I'm not asking for a real marriage. I'm offering you a legal shield. Protection. The ability to publish your research without Richard destroying you. Clara's mind was racing. It was completely mad. Marrying a man she'd known for 3 weeks to escape her ex-husband's legal machinations. Using the very system she was critiquing to protect her critique of it. It was also the only option that made sense. If we do this, she said slowly, it's a business arrangement. Legal protection in exchange for what? What do you get out of this? I get to stop being haunted by my wife's death. I get to do something that matters. I get to help someone fight the same system that killed her. Adrian's voice cracked. Let me do this, Clara. Let me make her death mean something. They stood there in her tiny front room, London's winter darkness pressing against the windows, holding on to a plan that was either brilliant or completely destructive. Yes, Clara heard herself say. Yes, we'll get married. We'll use their rules against them. We'll protect the work. Adrian pulled her into a hug that felt more like 2 soldiers preparing for battle than anything romantic. We'll need a license, he said into her hair, and we'll need to move fast before Richard realizes what we're doing. How fast? Tomorrow. We get married tomorrow. Clara pulled back to look at him. Are you sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They stayed up all night planning, logistics, timing, how to keep it quiet until after the fact. Adrian sent for his solicitor at dawn. By noon, they had a special license. By evening, they were standing in a small church in Cheapside with only the priest and his wife as witnesses. Do you, Adrian Blackthorne, take this woman? Clara barely heard the words. This wasn't a wedding. This was a legal maneuver, a strategy, protection wrapped in ceremony. She said, I do, when prompted, and meant, I'm choosing survival. Adrian slid a ring on her finger. His mother's ring, he'd said, the one she'd worn before his father had her committed. They signed the documents. The priest pronounced them married. And just like that, Clara Whitmore ceased to exist. In her place stood Clara Blackthorne, Duchess of Thornfield, untouchable, unmarketable as damaged goods, and absolutely, completely terrified of what she'd just done. They left the church in silence, climbing into Adrian's carriage. He'd sent word ahead to his London house to prepare the guest wing. Separate rooms, separate lives, a marriage that existed on paper and nowhere else. Are you all right? He asked as the carriage rolled through dark streets. I just married a man I barely know to escape my ex-husband's attempt to have me committed. I'm the furthest thing from all right. We can have it annulled if you change your mind. No. Clara's voice was firm. We did this for a reason. I'm publishing that book, Adrian. Richard doesn't get to win. When they arrived at the Blackthorne residence, a messenger was waiting. The note was from Richard, delivered within hours of their marriage being recorded. Somehow he already knew. Congratulations on your hasty nuptials. Marrying a title won't save you. I have other options, and you've just made this much more interesting. Clara handed the note to Adrian without speaking. He read it, his expression going cold and dangerous. He's threatening you, Adrian said quietly. Threatening us. Yes. Good. Adrian crumpled the note. Let him try. He has no idea who he's dealing with now. But as Clara climbed the stairs to her new bedroom in a house that felt like a beautiful prison, Richard's words echoed in her head. I have other options. She thought marriage would protect her, but what if she'd just given Richard exactly the weapon he needed? What if making herself a duchess had simply raised the stakes? What if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? Clara didn't sleep that first night as a duchess. She lay in a guest bedroom 3 times the size of her entire townhouse, staring at ceiling moldings that probably cost more than a year of her research stipend, and tried to figure out what she'd done. Married Adrian Blackthorne. To protect her work. To escape Richard's legal maneuvering. To survive. The justification sounded hollower at 3 in the morning. A soft knock broke through her spiral of anxiety. Adrian stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. "I saw your light," he said. "Couldn't sleep either?" "I keep waiting for Richard to show up with constables and doctors, claiming I've seduced you while mentally incompetent." Clara sat up, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "Or for you to realize this was insane and demand an annulment. Neither of those things is going to happen." Adrian moved into the room, careful to stay near the door. Propriety, even now. "But I've been thinking about Richard's note, about his other options." "You think he's planning something?" "I know he is. Men like Richard don't make threats they can't execute." Adrian ran a hand through his hair. "We need to move first. Make this marriage so public, so legitimate, that he can't undermine it." "How?" "We announce it, properly, in the society pages, at public events. We make you visible as the Duchess of Thornfield before Richard can spin a narrative about fraud or coercion." Clara's stomach twisted. "You want me to perform being your wife? In front of everyone who already thinks I'm a social climbing disaster? I want you to claim your position before Richard takes it from you." Adrian's voice was firm. "Tomorrow night, the Winterbourne Ball. It's the largest society event of the season. We attend together, we dance, we make it clear this marriage is real." "Adrian, I can't." "Yes, you can. You walked into the Ashford Gala in red and survived. You confronted Richard in front of half of London's elite. You can do this." "That was different. That was just me. This is us. This is making you part of my scandal." "I'm already part of it." He finally crossed the room, sitting on the edge of her bed with careful distance between them. "Clara, the moment I invited you to that lecture, I chose a side. I'm not backing down now." They sat in the dark room, 2 people bound by legal documents and mutual desperation, trying to convince each other they hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. "Tell me about her," Clara said quietly. "Your wife. What was she like?" Adrian was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Brilliant. Fragile. She saw the world in colors I couldn't imagine, but she also saw how little space the world gave her to be brilliant, and it killed her, slowly, until there was nothing left but the performance of being someone she wasn't." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just don't let yourself disappear the way she did. Promise me that." "I promise." "Then we'll go to this Winterbourne Ball. We'll be seen. We'll make this real." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "And Clara? Wear red again. Let them know exactly who you are." The next day passed in a blur of preparation Clara didn't want and couldn't escape. Adrian's staff, Clara had staff now apparently, descended with fabrics and jewelry and opinions about what the Duchess of Thornfield should wear to her first public appearance. "The red silk from Paris," the head housekeeper, Mrs. Bridges, declared, "with the Blackthorn diamonds." "I'm not wearing diamonds the size of walnuts," Clara protested. "You're a duchess. Walnuts are required." By evening, Clara barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror wore crimson silk that made the dress from the Ashford Gala look restrained, diamonds that caught light like warnings, hair arranged in a style that probably required architectural training. She looked like someone who belonged in Adrian's world. She looked like someone Richard couldn't touch. "You're terrifying," Adrian said when she came downstairs. He was in formal evening wear, ducal regalia that made him look less like the man who brought her dinner, and more like someone who could ruin lives with a signature. "Good. That's what we're going for, right? Terrifying legitimacy?" "Something like that." The carriage ride to the Winterbourne estate took 30 minutes through London's winter streets. Clara spent it trying not to vomit from nerves. This was different from the Ashford Gala. Then, she'd been alone, defiant, with nothing to lose. Now she had a title, a husband, a position to defend. Now failure meant destroying not just herself, but Adrian too. "Stop thinking so loud," Adrian said. "I can hear your panic from here." "I'm not panicked. You're gripping the seat hard enough to leave impressions." He pried one of her hands loose, held it in his. We walk in together. We dance. We make polite conversation. We leave. That's all this is. That's never all it is. Then we'll handle whatever comes. The Winterbourne ball made the Ashford Gala look like a casual dinner party. The estate was blazing with lights, carriages lined up for a quarter-mile. Everyone who mattered in London society packed into spaces designed to showcase wealth and status. Clara could feel the weight of attention before they even entered. "Their Graces, the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield," the announcer called. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. This was it, the moment when society decided if Clara was a duchess or an impostor, when they chose to accept Adrian's sudden marriage or destroy it with gossip and speculation. Lady Winterbourne approached first, which was either a good sign or an execution. She was 70, terrifying, and had the kind of social power that could make or break reputations with a lifted eyebrow. "Adrian, how extraordinary to see you at a social event." Her voice could cut glass. "And with a bride I wasn't aware you were courting." "Lady Winterbourne." Adrian's tone was perfectly calibrated, respectful but not deferential. "May I present my wife, Clara, Duchess of Thornfield. We were married yesterday." "How precipitous!" Lady Winterbourne's gaze swept over Clara like an appraiser examining questionable goods. "Miss Whitmore, as was, the divorced woman who caused such a stir at the Ashford Gala." "The very same," Clara said, keeping her voice steady, "though the name is Blackthorne now." "Indeed, and tell me, Your Grace, the title dripped with skepticism. Did you seduce the Duke, or did he rescue you? Society seems divided on which scandal we're witnessing." "Neither." Clara met her eyes. "We married because we chose to. No seduction, no rescue. Just two people who decided they'd rather face society's judgment together than alone." The calculation behind Lady Winterbourne's eyes was visible. She could destroy this right now, declare the marriage scandalous and Clara unacceptable. Or she could do something else. How refreshingly honest! Lady Winterbourne's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but close. "I was beginning to think nobody in this ballroom was capable of truth anymore. Welcome, Duchess Blackthorne. Do try not to set too many more fires tonight. My carpets are irreplaceable." She swept away and Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. "Did that just happen?" she whispered to Adrian. "Lady Winterbourne just gave you her approval, which means everyone else will fall in line or risk her disapproval." Adrian looked almost impressed. "How did you know to be honest instead of deferential?" "I didn't. I just don't have the energy to lie anymore." They moved through the ballroom and Clara could feel the shift happening in real time. Lady Winterbourne's acceptance created permission for others. Conversations resumed, still speculative but less openly hostile. People approached to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to performative, but all of it acknowledged her new status. Then she saw Richard. He was across the room with Charlotte, both of them watching with expressions Clara couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more calculating. "He's here," Clara said quietly. "I know, don't engage. We're here to establish your legitimacy, not provoke him." But Richard was already moving toward them, Charlotte trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. "Your Grace," Richard said to Adrian, the title pointed. "Congratulations on your marriage. Very sudden, very convenient." "Convenient for whom?" Adrian's voice was ice. "For Clara, certainly. From divorced pariah to duchess in a matter of weeks. One might wonder what inducements were offered. Several people nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. This was exactly what Richard wanted, a public confrontation where he could plant seeds of doubt about the marriage's legitimacy. Clara felt the old instinct rise up, to defend herself, to argue, to make Richard understand. Then she remembered she didn't need his understanding anymore. She had something better. "Richard, you've always been so concerned about my choices." Clara's voice carried, clear and calm. "My reading, my research, my refusal to be the silent wife you wanted. And now my marriage. It's almost touching how much you care about my well-being. Or is it control you're worried about losing?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm concerned about propriety, about a respected duke being manipulated by a woman with a documented history of instability." "Documented by whom? You?" Clara stepped closer. "The doctor you paid to prescribe me laudanum when I was too anxious? My mother, who you convinced to write a letter questioning my sanity? You've been building a case against me for months, Richard. The only question is why you're so desperate to destroy my credibility. I'm not. Yes, you are. Because my research threatens you. Because I'm publishing documentation of exactly how men like you use the law to erase women. Because as long as I have a voice, your perfect life with your perfect replacement isn't quite as perfect as you need it to be. The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Charlotte looked mortified. Richard looked dangerous. You're making wild accusations. I'm stating facts. Clara pulled the letter from her bag. Richard's threats, his legal strategy, all of it. You hired someone to follow me. You threatened my publisher. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, all documented in your own words. So please, continue lecturing me about propriety. I'm fascinated to hear how destroying your ex-wife's life qualifies as appropriate behavior. She handed the letter to Adrian, who read it with an expression that could freeze fire. Mr. Whitmore, Adrian said quietly, if you ever threaten my wife again, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy you. Socially, financially, legally. Are we clear? Richard's face went red. You can't. I'm a duke. You're a merchant with social ambitions. Yes, I absolutely can. Adrian offered Clara his arm. We're done here. They walked away, leaving Richard standing there with his accusations, and Charlotte looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her. The crowd parted around them, and Clara could hear the whispers starting, but different this time. Not speculation about her instability, but about Richard's obsession, about a man so threatened by his ex-wife's independence that he'd tried to have her committed. That was reckless, Adrian said once they'd reached a quieter corner. That was necessary. He would have kept pushing, kept planting doubts, until everyone believed I'd manipulated you. Now they know the truth. Now they know part of it. Richard still has resources, Clara. Humiliating him publicly might have just made things worse. Or it might have finally put him on the defensive. The rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. People approached with new interest, no longer just assessing scandal, but actually engaging with Clara as a person. Women asked about her research with genuine curiosity. Men who'd dismissed her at the Ashford Gala now treated her with careful respect. The power dynamics had shifted, and everyone felt it. By the time they left, near midnight, Clara's feet ached and her face hurt from maintaining composure. But they'd done it. They'd made the marriage public and legitimate. They'd confronted Richard's accusations directly. They'd survived. The carriage ride home was silent until Clara finally said, "Thank you." For what? For threatening to destroy Richard, for standing beside me, for making this real. It is real, Clara. Maybe not in the way marriages usually are, but it's real. Back at the Blackthorn residence, Adrian walked her to her door but didn't come in. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we deal with whatever Richard does next. But before Clara could retreat to her room, Mrs. Bridges appeared with an urgent expression. Your Grace, a package arrived while you were out. The messenger said it was urgent. The package was from Henry Ashworth. Clara opened it with shaking hands and found the first printed copy of her book, The Erasure of Women. Legal Frameworks of Disappearance from Medieval England to Modern Times by Clara Blackthorn, Duchess of Thornfield. Her words, her research, her truth, real and permanent. Adrian, she called, her voice breaking. He came back, took one look at the book, and understood. It's real, Clara whispered. It's real. They sat up until dawn, Clara reading passages aloud, Adrian listening and occasionally offering observations. This was what partnership looked like. Not romance or performance, but two people working toward something that mattered more than themselves. As the sun rose over London, painting the city in shades of gold and gray, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not healing, that would take time, but hope. The fragile, dangerous kind that made you believe things could actually change. The book's release was scheduled for the following week, and Henry Ashworth had already started advance publicity, which meant Richard had a week to make his move. It came on the third day, not through legal channels, but through Beatrice Thornhill's Society column. Sources close to Mr. Richard Whitmore revealed disturbing details about his ex-wife's mental state during their marriage. Medical professionals treated the former Mrs. Whitmore for severe anxiety and episodes of hysteria. Questions arise about whether the Duke of Thornfield was aware of his bride's history when he married her so precipitously. One must wonder if His Grace has been deceived, or if this is a marriage of convenience designed to give legitimacy to a woman whose own family has expressed concerns about her welfare. Eleanor brought the paper over, her expression grim. He's not backing down. He's doubling down. Of course he is. Clara felt surprisingly calm. He's trying to undermine the book before it's even released. Make people question my credibility, my sanity, my marriage. Classic Richard. So what do? I fight back. With truth. Clara spent that day writing. Not research, not analysis, but her story. Every detail of her marriage to Richard, the slow erosion of herself, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the way he'd weaponized doctors and diagnoses to make her question her own reality. She wrote about the laudanum he'd insisted she take, the hysteria diagnosis that came whenever she disagreed with him, the systematic destruction of her confidence until she could barely recognize herself. She wrote it all, and she sent it to Ashworth that evening. Are you sure about this? Adrian asked, reading over her shoulder. No, but I'm doing it anyway. This is your private pain. Once you publish it, it belongs to everyone. It already does. Richard made sure of that when he started feeding his version to Thornhill. At least now people will hear mine. Ashworth published it 2 days later as a companion piece to the book announcement, A Duchess Speaks. One woman's account of legal erasure and survival. The response was immediate and divided. Half of London society was scandalized, a duchess publicly discussing her failed marriage, her mental health treatment, her ex-husband's controlling behavior. The other half was riveted. Women started writing to Clara, sharing their own stories. Doctors who'd been pressured to diagnose women with hysteria when they showed independence. Lawyers who'd watched men use the legal system to destroy inconvenient wives. The conversation Clara had wanted to start was happening, loudly, publicly, impossibly. Richard's response came through his solicitor, a letter threatening legal action for defamation, claiming every detail Clara had written was a malicious lie. Clara's response was simple. Prove it. Because she had the medical records, the doctor's notes about Richard's insistence on treatment, letters where Richard had discussed his concerns about her emotional instability with her own family. She had documentation for every claim she'd made. Richard had built his case to control her. He'd never imagined she'd use it to expose him. The scandal consumed London society for a week. Dinner conversations revolved around Clara's revelations, Richard's denials, the question of what truth actually looked like when powerful men wrote the records. Then came the moment that changed everything. Charlotte showed up at the Blackthorn residence unannounced, looking like she hadn't slept in days. I need to speak with you, she said to Clara, alone. They sat in Clara's private study, two women who should have been enemies, separated by expensive tea and years of resentment. I read your article, Charlotte said finally. The one about your marriage to Richard. And you're here to defend him? Tell me I'm lying? No. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. I'm here to tell you you're not. The laudanum, the doctors, the way he makes you feel like you're always doing something wrong, it's all true, because he's doing the same things to me. Clara set down her teacup carefully. What? I thought I was different, that he loved me the way he couldn't love you. But it's starting. The little comments about how I should dress, what I should think, who I should talk to. The suggestion that I seemed anxious and maybe should see his doctor. Charlotte's hands were shaking. I'm becoming you, Clara, and I'm terrified. Why are you telling me this? Because you got out. You survived him, and I need to know how. They talked for 2 hours. Clara shared everything, the slow recognition that she was disappearing, the decision to leave, the aftermath. Charlotte shared her growing fears, the ways Richard was already erasing her personality, the engagement she was beginning to regret but didn't know how to escape. You're not married yet, Clara said. You can still leave. My family has already announced the engagement. We've set a date. I can't just... Yes, you can. That's the point. You can always leave. It's hard and terrifying and people will judge you, but you can do it. Charlotte left without making promises, but Clara saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of it. 2 days before the book's official release, Charlotte called off her engagement. The society pages exploded. Richard's narrative, that Clara was unstable and manipulative, collapsed when his new fiancée left him citing concerns about his controlling behavior. When Charlotte gave an interview echoing many of Clara's claims about Richard's treatment, suddenly the conversation shifted from, is Clara Blackthorn credible? to How Many Women Has Richard Whitmore Done This To? The book released to immediate controversy and surprising success. Academic circles debated its arguments. Women's groups used it as evidence for legal reform. Publishers Weekly called it inflammatory, necessary, and impossible to ignore. Clara did readings at bookshops and libraries, always introduced as Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornfield, using her title as both shield and weapon. Adrian attended every event, sitting in the back, a silent reminder that she had support. 3 weeks after publication, the Oxford Historical Society invited Clara to present her research. The same society that had rejected her application for academic membership before her divorce. "You don't have to accept," Adrian said when the invitation arrived. "Yes, I do. This is what I've been working toward." The presentation hall was packed. Clara stood at the podium, looking out at faces ranging from supportive to hostile to curious, and began. "I want to talk about erasure. Not the metaphorical kind, but the legal, systematic, documented removal of women from the historical record. How law and custom work together to ensure that women's property, work, thoughts, and existence could be eliminated with a signature." She spoke for 40 minutes, presenting evidence, citing cases, building arguments that were academically rigorous and personally devastating. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough to make her think she'd failed. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire hall rose in standing ovation. Not everyone. There were men who sat with crossed arms, women who looked uncomfortable, but enough people stood that Clara felt something break open in her chest. Recognition. Finally. During the question period, an elderly professor in the front row stood. "Your Grace, some critics have suggested your research is colored by personal bias, that your own failed marriage has made you unable to view these legal frameworks objectively. How do you respond?" Clara had prepared for this question, had practiced diplomatic answers about academic rigor and documented evidence. Instead, she told the truth. "You're right. My research is absolutely colored by personal experience. I lived through legal erasure. I watched myself disappear under laws designed to give my husband complete control. And yes, that makes me biased. It also makes me an expert. I know these systems from the inside. I know what they feel like, how they work, why they persist. Objective distance is valuable in research, but sometimes lived experience is more valuable. Sometimes the people who've survived systems of oppression are exactly the ones who should be studying them." The applause was even louder this time. That evening, walking back to the carriage with Adrian, Clara felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. "You did it," Adrian said. "Did what?" "Made them take you seriously. Not as a scandal or a duchess or a cautionary tale, as a scholar. We did it. I couldn't have gotten here without you." "You absolutely could have. It just might have taken longer and been messier." They rode home in comfortable silence. At some point during the past weeks, the Blackthorn residence had started feeling like home instead of a museum. Adrian's presence had started feeling like partnership instead of strategy. It wasn't love. Clara wasn't sure she believed in that anymore, but it was something real and sustaining and unexpectedly precious. 2 months after publication, the book was in its third printing. Legal scholars were citing it in arguments for reform. Women's advocacy groups were using it as educational material. Clara's research had become part of a conversation much larger than herself. Richard had gone quiet. Charlotte had moved to Bath to live with her sister, safely away from London society and Richard's influence. Eleanor had started speaking to Clara again, carefully, still worried but willing to try. And Clara had started new research, this time on modern divorce law, building on her historical framework to propose actual legislative changes. The night Clara received a letter from a member of Parliament requesting her consultation on proposed legal reforms, she sat at her desk and cried. Not from sadness, from the sheer overwhelming relief of mattering, of having her work taken seriously, of being seen not as Richard's failed wife or Adrian's convenient duchess, but as Clara Blackthorn, scholar and advocate and force for change. Adrian found her there, tears streaming down her face, clutching the letter. "What happened?" "They want my help. Parliament. They're actually considering reforms, and they want me to consult." "Of course they do. Your work is brilliant. I never thought—" Her voice broke. "I spent so many years being told my thoughts didn't matter, My research was a hobby. My opinions were inconvenient. And now Parliament wants to hear what I have to say. Adrian pulled her into a hug, and Clara let herself be held. Not as rescue or romance, but as recognition that she'd survived something brutal and come out stronger. You've changed things, Adrian said into her hair. Not just for yourself. For everyone who comes after. We've changed things, Clara corrected. You gave me the protection to do this work. You gave me a reason to stop hiding in grief. They stood there in Clara's study, holding each other in a marriage that had started as strategy and become something neither of them had expected. Genuine partnership. Not perfect, not romantic, but real and sustaining and infinitely more valuable than the performance Clara had survived with Richard. That night, Clara wrote in her journal for the first time since the divorce. Today, Parliament asked for my consultation on legal reforms. Today, my research mattered more than my scandal. Today, I proved that surviving isn't the same as giving up. Richard wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became impossible to ignore. And that is victory. The invitation to testify before Parliament arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, spring finally breaking through London's grey winter like a promise someone might actually keep. Clara read the letter 3 times before she trusted what it said. The Committee on Marriage and Property Reform wanted her testimony, not her opinions casually mentioned in consultation. Her actual sworn testimony about the legal frameworks that enabled systematic erasure of women's rights. They want me to testify, she said to Adrian over breakfast, her hands shaking slightly. In 2 weeks, in front of the full committee. Adrian set down his newspaper, actually smiling, something he did more often now, but still rarely enough to be noteworthy. Then you'd better start preparing. This is terrifying. This is what you've been working toward. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not articulate enough, or they dismiss me, or... Clara. Adrian reached across the table, took her hand. You've already survived Richard trying to have you committed, society calling you unstable, and publishing research that half of London's establishment wanted buried. Parliament will be easy in comparison. That's possibly the least reassuring thing you've ever said to me. I try. The next 2 weeks were controlled chaos. Clara drafted and redrafted her testimony, consulted with legal scholars who'd become allies, practiced answering hostile questions with Eleanor, who'd fully reconciled with Clara after Charlotte's revelations about Richard proved everything Clara had been saying. What if they ask about your mental health? Eleanor posed, playing devil's advocate in Clara's study. Your treatment during the marriage? Then I'll tell them the truth. That my ex-husband weaponized medical diagnosis to control me. That hysteria has been used for centuries to dismiss women who refuse to be silent. That the same legal system allowing husbands to have wives committed without oversight is the system we're trying to reform. Good. Use the personal examples, but tie them to the structural issues. Don't let them make this about your individual case. Adrian listened from his chair by the window, occasionally offering observations, mostly just providing steady presence. Somewhere in the past months, their marriage of convenience had developed into something neither of them had planned. Genuine respect, affection built on shared purpose, partnership that didn't require performance. They still had separate bedrooms, still maintained the fiction that this was purely legal protection. But Clara had started noticing the way Adrian's rare smiles made something warm settle in her chest. The way his hand at her back during public events felt less like strategy and more like comfort. She wasn't sure what to do with those feelings, so she did what she always did, buried them in work. The night before her testimony, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom until after midnight, rehearsing arguments, anticipating attacks, trying to prepare for every possible question. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Come in. Adrian entered carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of what looked like very expensive scotch. You're going to pace a hole in that carpet. I'm preparing. You're panicking. He poured 2 generous measures. Here, this won't help your testimony, but it might help you sleep. Clara took the glass, drank, felt the burn. What if I fail tomorrow? What if all this work, all this fighting, comes down to me standing in front of Parliament and choking? Then you'll have tried. That's more than most people do. Adrian sat on the edge of her bed, the same careful distance they always maintained. But you won't fail. I've watched you face down Lady Winterbourne, Richard, an entire ballroom of people who wanted you to disappear. You don't know how to fail quietly. I don't know how to do this at all. Nobody does. That's the point. They don't expect women to testify before Parliament about their own erasure. They don't expect someone to stand up and say, this system is broken and here's exactly how. You're already doing the impossible just by being there. Clara drank more scotch, let the warmth settle. Why did you really marry me, Adrian? And don't say legal protection. There had to be easier ways to help. He was quiet for a long moment. Because you reminded me what it felt like to care about something. After my wife died, I spent 3 years going through motions, managing the estate, attending occasional events, existing without living. Then you walked into that gala in red, and I saw someone fighting to exist on their own terms. I wanted to remember what that felt like. And do you remember? I do more than remember. I'm actually living again. He met her eyes. So thank you for letting me be part of this fight. Thank you for making it possible. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking expensive scotch in a bedroom that wasn't quite hers, but wasn't quite just a guest room anymore either. Clara felt the knot of anxiety in her chest loosen slightly. I should let you sleep, Adrian said, standing. Stay! The word came out before Clara could stop it. I don't mean just stay. Talk to me. Help me not think about tomorrow. So he stayed. They talked about everything except Parliament, his plans for the Yorkshire estate, her ideas for future research, the absurdity of society parties they'd attended. Normal conversation between two people who'd accidentally built something real in the middle of survival. Clara fell asleep sitting up against the headboard, scotch glass still in her hand. She woke at dawn to find Adrian asleep in the chair by her window. Blanket someone had draped over him, still keeping watch. The Houses of Parliament were designed to intimidate. Gothic spires and endless corridors, and the weight of centuries pressing down through stone and tradition. Clara wore navy blue, professional, serious, undeniably respectable, with the blackthorn diamonds because sometimes armor looked like jewelry. You look like you could take over the government, Eleanor said, adjusting Clara's collar. I just want them to listen. They'll listen. You're a duchess testifying about legal reform. They have to. The committee room was smaller than Clara expected, but no less imposing. Rows of seats for the MPs, a single chair facing them for witnesses, galleries above where observers could watch. Adrian was there, sitting in the back, solid and certain. Eleanor beside him. Even Henry Ashworth had come, probably already planning how to publicize whatever happened next. The committee chairman, Lord Pembridge, was 70 and looked like he'd never had an original thought that didn't come from a leather-bound book written by someone dead. But he was the one driving reform efforts, surprisingly progressive for a man who'd probably never spoken to a woman as an equal in his life. Your Grace, he began, thank you for appearing before this committee. We understand you've conducted extensive research on historical legal frameworks regarding women's property rights and marital law. I have, my lord. And you've also experienced these frameworks personally, in your own marriage and divorce. I have. Some members of this committee have expressed concern that your personal experience might bias your testimony, that you may be using your scholarship to pursue a vendetta against your former husband rather than pursuing objective truth. There it was, the attack she'd been preparing for. Clara met Pembridge's eyes directly. My lord, I would argue that lived experience doesn't create bias, it creates expertise. I can cite medieval property law and modern case precedent. I can analyze legal language and trace historical patterns, but I can also tell you exactly what it feels like to be legally erased while still breathing, to have every decision, every asset, every aspect of your life controlled by someone else, simply because the law says your personhood ended at marriage. That's not bias. That's evidence. Murmurs from the committee. Pembridge made a note. Walk us through your research, Your Grace. What did you find? Clara took a breath and began. She talked about coverture laws that made married women legally non-existent, about property rights that transferred everything a woman owned to her husband at marriage, about divorce laws that left women destitute even when their husbands were at fault. She cited cases, referenced documents, built arguments with the precision of someone who'd spent years living in these frameworks and more years studying them. She talked about modern equivalents, how current law still favored husbands in property disputes, how women could be declared mentally incompetent by their husbands' chosen doctors, how the legal system was structured to make leaving an abusive or controlling marriage nearly impossible without losing everything. An hour passed. Then two. The committee asked questions ranging from genuinely curious to actively hostile. Clara answered all of them, never losing her composure, never backing down. Then Lord Ashcroft, a red-faced MP who'd voted against every reform measure ever proposed, leaned forward. Your Grace, you claim your former husband attempted to have you declared mentally incompetent, that he weaponized medical diagnosis for control. Do you have any proof of these serious accusations? I do, my lord. Clara pulled documents from her folder. Medical records showing my ex-husband's insistence on specific treatments, letters where he discussed my supposed instability with my family, documentation of his attempts to block publication of my research by questioning my mental fitness. All of it in his own hand or the hand of doctors he personally selected and compensated. She passed the documents to the committee clerk, watched them circulate, saw Ashcroft's face go from smug to uncomfortable as he read Richard's own words. This is highly irregular. This is evidence, my lord, of exactly what I've been describing. The legal system allows husbands to control wives through medical diagnosis, property restriction, and social pressure. My ex-husband used every tool available to him. The only unusual thing about my case is that I survived it and documented everything. But surely, another MP interjected, surely these are extreme examples. Most marriages don't involve such manipulation, don't they? Clara leaned forward. How many women in this room right now could leave their marriages without losing their children, their homes, their income? How many could contradict their husbands publicly without being called hysterical? How many have opinions, interests, desires that their husbands simply ignore because the law says they don't have to care? Silence. The system I'm describing isn't extreme, it's normal. It's designed this way, and it will stay this way unless you gentlemen decide that women's legal personhood matters more than men's convenience. The room erupted in discussion, some MPs outraged at Clara's directness, others clearly rethinking assumptions they'd held their entire lives. Pembridge called for order, looked at Clara with something almost like respect. Your Grace, this committee will take your testimony under serious advisement. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Clara thought about everything she'd survived to get here. Richard's control and the divorce, society's judgment, the marriage to Adrian that had saved her work but could have destroyed them both. The months of research and writing and fighting. Yes, my lord, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here asking for special treatment or sympathy. I'm here demanding legal equality. The right for women to own property in marriage, the right to custody of our children, the right to leave marriages without being declared insane or destroyed financially, the right to exist as full human beings under the law. These aren't radical demands, they're basic human rights. And if this committee doesn't address them, the next generation of women will be fighting the same battles I am. Only they'll be angrier, and they won't be as polite. She sat back. Done. The committee adjourned for deliberation. Clara walked out of the chamber on shaking legs, the adrenaline that had sustained her through 3 hours of testimony finally crashing. Adrian was waiting in the corridor. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into a hug that Clara melted into. You were magnificent, he said into her hair. I might have been too aggressive. I called them out directly. You told them the truth. That's what they needed to hear. Eleanor appeared with tea from somewhere, practical as always. The gallery was full of women. I've never seen that many female observers at a committee hearing. They hung on every word you said. Did I help or make it worse? Clara, you told Parliament they were complicit in legal erasure and needed to fix it. That's not making it worse. That's starting a revolution. The newspapers the next day confirmed Eleanor's assessment. Some called Clara's testimony inflammatory and inappropriately aggressive. Others called it brave and long overdue. Beatrice Thornhill, surprisingly, wrote a column suggesting that perhaps Clara Blackthorne had a point about the legal system being designed to silence women. The real response came from women. Letters flooded the Blackthorne residence, hundreds of them, from women sharing their own stories of legal erasure, of marriages that destroyed them, of systems designed to keep them powerless. They thanked Clara for speaking up, for putting words to experiences they thought were uniquely shameful. You've started something, Adrian said, looking at the stacks of correspondence. I've opened a door. Other people will have to walk through it. The committee's preliminary recommendations came 3 weeks later. They weren't perfect. Full legal equality would take years. maybe decades. But they proposed reforms to property law, changes to divorce proceedings, oversight for commitment procedures, small steps that could become larger ones. It was more than Clara had hoped for. The celebration happened at Giuseppe's naturally. Clara and Adrian, Eleanor and her father, Henry Ashworth, already planning how to publish Clara's committee testimony as a pamphlet. They drank too much wine and ate too much pasta and talked about the future like it might actually be different. To Clara, Eleanor toasted, who refused to disappear. To all of us, Clara corrected, who refused to let the system win. Walking home through London's spring streets, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not healing, that was still happening, slowly, imperfectly, but closure. She'd faced Parliament, she'd told her truth. She'd survived Richard's attempts to destroy her and turned that survival into something larger than herself. I got a letter from Charlotte today, Clara said to Adrian as they walked. How is she? Better. She's teaching at a girls' school in Bath, using her experience to help young women recognize controlling behavior before they marry into it. Clara smiled. She said she's grateful I showed her it was possible to leave. You showed a lot of people that. They reached the Blackthorn residence, but Clara didn't want to go in yet. The night was warm, spring finally real instead of just promised, and she felt lighter than she had in years. Adrian, she said carefully, this marriage, this started as legal protection, strategy, but somewhere along the way it became real, he finished. I know. So what do we do about that? He took her hand, the gesture familiar now but still significant. What do you want to do about it? I don't know. I'm not sure I trust my judgment about marriage anymore. Richard destroyed that. Richard destroyed your trust in his version of marriage, the kind where one person controls and the other disappears. But we're not doing that version. What version are we doing? The kind where two people choose each other every day, where partnership matters more than possession, where you can be brilliant and difficult and angry, and I'll still be here. Adrian pulled her closer. I'm not Richard, Clara. I don't want you smaller. I want you exactly as you are, complicated and fierce and impossible to ignore. Clara felt tears threaten. I'm not ready for this. For us being real instead of strategic. Then we'll wait. We'll keep being strategic until you're ready. Or we won't wait. We'll figure it out as we go. But Clara, he cupped her face gently. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need, whatever pace you need, I'm here. She kissed him. Not desperately or dramatically, but carefully, testing, allowing herself to want something that wasn't survival or strategy, but actual feeling. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely imperfect. I'm still scared, she whispered against his mouth. Good. That means you're being smart. He kissed her back. I'm scared too, but I'm done letting fear make all my decisions. They went inside together, and for the first time since their wedding, Clara didn't retreat to her separate bedroom. They stayed up talking in Adrian's study, eventually falling asleep on the sofa like two people who'd forgotten they were supposed to maintain careful distance. The reforms passed 6 months later, watered down but real. Women gained limited property rights in marriage. Divorce proceedings were restructured to be less punishing. Commitment procedures required oversight beyond a husband's word. It wasn't everything Clara had fought for, but it was progress. She continued her research, expanding into contemporary legal frameworks and advocacy. Adrian's Yorkshire estate became their primary residence. Clara preferred the quiet and space for thinking. Adrian preferred being away from London's social performance. They came to the city for her work, for lectures and advocacy, and the occasional unavoidable society event. They were seen together at those events now not as scandal, but as partnership. The Duchess who'd reformed marriage law, and the Duke who'd supported her. Their story had transformed from cautionary tale to something else. Complicated, real, impossible to fit into easy categories. Richard had remarried, quickly, quietly, to a woman even younger than Charlotte, who never spoke in public and seemed to exist solely as decoration. Clara felt sorry for her but couldn't save everyone. Eleanor got engaged to a journalist who loved that she had opinions and encouraged her to share them loudly. They married in a small ceremony where Clara was matron of honor and Adrian gave the toast. Charlotte's school in Bath gained a reputation for producing students who refused to tolerate nonsense from men. Clara visited occasionally to lecture, always leaving energized by young women who'd internalized the lesson that their worth wasn't determined by marriage. 3 years after her Parliament testimony, Clara published her second book, a comprehensive analysis of modern legal reform efforts and recommendations for future change. This one didn't cause scandal because she'd already burned that bridge. It just caused conversation. She was invited to lecture at Cambridge, Oxford, the Royal Society. The same institutions that had dismissed her before her divorce now treated her as an expert. The transformation was strange and satisfying and proof that persistence mattered. But the moment that felt most like victory came 5 years after that first gala. Clara was invited back to the Ashford estate, not as Richard's discarded wife or a scandalous divorcee, but as the Duchess of Thornfield, respected scholar, invited speaker. She wore red, not defiance this time. Celebration. Lady Ashford greeted her at the door with genuine warmth. "Clara, darling, so glad you could attend. I've been telling everyone about your recent publication. Absolutely fascinating work." "Thank you, Patricia." "And where's His Grace?" "Adrian's in Yorkshire. I told him I could handle one party without backup." "Good for you. Independence is so attractive on you." The ballroom was full of familiar faces, but everything felt different. These same people who'd whispered about her breakdown now discussed her research. The women who'd avoided her now sought her advice about property law and divorce proceedings. The men who'd dismissed her now listened when she spoke. Clara was standing by the windows watching London's lights when someone cleared their throat behind her. Richard. He looked older, tired. The polish was still there, but wearing thin at the edges. "Clara, Your Grace, I wanted to—" He stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. "Did you want to congratulate me on my work? Apologize for trying to have me committed? Ask how I've been?" I wanted to say I was wrong. The words came out stiff, difficult. "About you. About what you were capable of. I spent 8 years trying to make you fit a role you were never meant for. And when you wouldn't, I tried to destroy you instead of questioning whether the role was the problem." Clara studied him. This was probably the closest Richard would ever come to actual apology. The nearest he'd get to understanding what he'd done. "Thank you for saying that. Does it change anything?" "No, but I appreciate the honesty." Clara set down her champagne. "Richard, I spent years being angry at you, hating what you did to me. But I've realized something. You didn't destroy me. You tried. You used every tool available. But I'm still here. I'm thriving. And the only power you have over me now is what I give you. So I'm giving you nothing." She walked away without waiting for response, feeling lighter than she had in years. Richard's acknowledgement didn't matter. His apology didn't change the past. But her refusal to let him occupy space in her present, that was freedom. Adrian had been right all those years ago. She'd worn red to a funeral and made everyone else realize they were corpses. Now she wore red to celebrations because she'd survived and built a life so far outside their judgment that their opinions became irrelevant. That night back at the Blackthorn London residence, Clara wrote in her journal, 5 years ago, I thought surviving Richard meant winning, but survival was just the beginning. Real victory looks like this: research that changes laws, a marriage that's actual partnership, the ability to walk into rooms that tried to destroy me and feel nothing but pity for how small they tried to make me. Richard wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became impossible to ignore. And that, finally, is enough. She closed the journal and went to find Adrian, who was in his study reading her latest manuscript. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think you're going to start another revolution." "Good. The first one was getting boring." He pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, this thing between them finally uncomplicated by strategy or fear. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their previous lives and built something new. "I love you," Adrian said. "I should have said it sooner, but I love you. Not because you're brilliant or fierce or impossible. Because you're you, all of it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, even though it terrifies me. Even though I'm still learning how to trust this. We'll figure it out together." And they did. Not perfectly. Not without fights and doubts and moments of pure panic, but together, choosing each other daily, building a partnership that looked nothing like the marriages society expected. Clara Blackthorn continued her work, research, advocacy, lectures that challenged comfortable assumptions. She became a name synonymous with legal reform, a woman who'd survived erasure and dedicated her life to making sure it couldn't keep happening. But more than that, she became herself. fully, unapologetically, impossibly, herself. The woman Richard had tried to silence became the voice that changed laws. The woman society had dismissed became the scholar they cited. The woman who'd walked into a gala in red, broken, and defiant became the duchess who proved that sometimes surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to burn down the entire system and build something better in the ashes. And Clara Blackthorne did exactly that. Years later, sitting in her study at the Yorkshire estate, surrounded by books and research and letters from women she'd helped, Clara would think about that first night, the Ashford Gala, the red dress, the decision to show up when everyone expected her to disappear. She'd been terrified then, broken and angry and desperate. Now she was none of those things. Or maybe she was still all of them, but she'd learned that broken things could be deadly. That anger could fuel change, that desperation could birth revolution. Adrian appeared in the doorway, older now, grayer, still choosing her every single day. Working late? Finishing the final chapter of the memoir. How does it end? Clara looked at him. This man who'd married her out of strategy and stayed out of love, who'd given her protection and partnership and proof that not all men wanted women small. It ends with me realizing that victory isn't about defeating the people who tried to destroy you. It's about building a life so complete, so purposeful, so undeniably yours that their attempts to erase you become footnotes in a story they never controlled. That's perfect. I know. She wrote the final sentence, set down her pen, and felt the weight of her own story settle into something finished. Not perfect. Never perfect. But hers. Clara Whitmore had walked into a ballroom and refused to disappear. Clara Blackthorne had walked out victorious, dragging an entire system toward change behind her. And that, finally, completely, was enough.